The way that I want to start with all us today, and I've got this fishbowl circle here, which I'll be asking for some volunteers for about midway through. But I want to start off as kind of an informal circle, which is just a little bit of a get to know you moment. And the thing that I think can capture kind of your best essence in the shortest amount of time is that I want to know your name, and I want to know what you wanted to be when you grew up. So here's the thing. You might have had something really crystallized, like a doctor or a lawyer, or something more like a practical, job. But I really want you to think back to kind of like the crazy idea that you had. I have a friend who told me when he was growing up, he used to tell his parents that he wanted to be a whale doctor. And his parents told him, like, nah, you can't do that. You can't be a whale doctor. You gotta be like a marine biologist or a veterinarian or a doctor, but you can't be a whale doctor. And it turns out this guy is now, he runs a trauma unit. And so he heals really big problems, right? He knew exactly what he wanted to be when he grew up. He had a clear idea. So think back to that crazy thing that you wanted to be, no matter what it was, and say your name. So we'll just go around quickly. So my name is Sarah, and I so badly, so truly wanted to be a mermaid. Okay, great. So that gives me kind of a window into your world. The truth is that no matter what you wanted to be, I know some element you're bringing that essence and that magic into what you're doing now. Like I know for you, for instance, sure spend a lot of time digging deep, yeah. And the detective in the room, I know, goes around looking for facts. My astronaut, constantly trying to get people to think bigger and beyond where we are right now. And I know you spend a lot of time putting out fires. I know you do. So thanks for sharing that insight into your world. My intention today is to give you a framework for restorative practices. A little bit about myself. Sarah, yes, I did want to be a mermaid, and I do love spending my time doing the best I can to go beneath the surface of what's occurring in life and bringing an opportunity for that to students and staff. I work for Keller ISD, where I'm their social emotional learning facilitator. We've got about 43 schools, about 34,000 students, and I'm going to share with you today a circle protocol that I created actually for our secondary schools to pair with their history, sociology, and psychology classes to go deep into aspects of their social identity. What I want to have you walk away with, though, is a circle protocol that you could use for a kindergartner or with a room of adults. Okay, I want you to be able to walk away with something that is structured so that you can create a space that's safe so that your students can be brave. That's kind of what we're going for here in these practices. My personal training through restorative is through TEA, but I spent time this summer on some Navajo land, circling in the traditional native form, and so I hope to bring a bit of that spirit to you as well. The history of restorative practices actually comes from native traditions. We've been circling for generations, even though perhaps we're treating this kind of like a new concept in the educational world. You guys go ahead and just kind of fill in wherever feels good. And don't be shy to hop in one of these seats. You might be committing to something later, but that's okay. So the practice itself does come from a native tradition. And around the 80s, there were a lot of native folks who were going to jail. And turns out, as I'm sure you guys can guess, these folks who were going to jail, a lot of them going for alcohol-related issues, were not getting better in jail. They were not getting any better. They were getting sicker, physically, emotionally, spiritually. And so the ideal was that the chiefs came, they brought to the criminal justice system, hey, here's the way that we deal with conflict. When we have conflict, the last thing that we do is ostracize people from our society. In fact, we wrap them in closer. So if something occurs in our society where someone has created harm in our community, we bring them to the circle of the community. And the first thing that we do is we restore them to their humanness. So before we get down to the nitty-gritty of what they did wrong, we first remind them of all the things they've done right. So we go around the circle and we tell them, hey, remember that time that you carried the water for me? Remember, you've always made me laugh since you were a young child. This is who you are. You are not the sum of your worst act. And so the circling protocols really came from a way to repair harm. Now, what we know about relationships is that we cannot repair relationships unless we have a relationship. So we've got to start first in these circling practices to build a community with the people that we're working for and with. So whether you're bringing this into a guidance lesson or you're using this with a small group, the intention is to really create that safe space so that the people within the circle can be vulnerable and can show the parts of themselves that need to be seen. Yeah? Any questions on kind of the history of that? So yeah, the purpose of the circle is really for every person within it to feel seen and heard or felt or understood, right? That's really the purpose. We know that learning cannot occur in a good way, whether it's academically or socially and emotionally, unless we feel safe. That's just the truth. From a neurological perspective, we cannot learn unless every part of our brain is online, and that requires us feeling safe, yeah? So that's what the purpose of these circles in so many ways is for. So of course this builds an opportunity for relationships because we're learning about each other in this form. It's also establishing a safe space through shared agreements, which we'll go through in a moment. Shared agreements in the circle are so important because they're not a to-do list of like, this is what we're gonna do. This is how we're going to be. This is who we're going to be together. And spaces that function in a way where we can really be brave have to have those set boundaries. It's almost like giving the canvas, right? Here's where the canvas was. Now you can paint as messy as you want with it, right? Because you know where the lines and the boundaries are. That's where agreements come in. They create a sense of belonging. And I think this is perhaps something most interesting to me because our generation of kids we're serving right now, they're often called the I generation. You guys heard this? Yeah, the I generation. Right, you can guess why that's so. And so the I generation, the American psychological data is showing that this generation is not only the most stressed and the least happy generation in documented history, it's also the most lonely. And that's the part I think that kills me the most, and that we have a responsibility as educators and counselors to look to, is how we can create spaces where our students can come in and weather the storm of deep social isolation that we're now encountering in a really technological world. Yeah? It increases academic focus. And the reason you're like, why would it increase academic focus? Because if we can take care of the needs of feeling welcomed and belonged, if we're thinking about like that classic hierarchy, right? If I have my sense of safety and then love and belonging, only then now can I get to those higher states of learning and achieving other goals. Decreases the likelihood of outbursts. As you guys know, a lot of times when you've got kids coming down to you having an outburst, a lot of times it's coming from that deep need, right? That deep need we all have, being seen and felt and heard and understood for what's occurring inside of us. So these circles bring an opportunity. So now is the opportunity for those of you who might like to be a part of this human experience called Restorative Circles. I need about 6 brave souls who might like to be a part of the fishbowl experience. This circle is the first circle that we go through before taking secondary students through a 6-week series that dives deep into social identity and feelings about race and culture. So this starts with something called appreciative inquiry. Appreciative inquiry means that before we dive into a difficult topic about something, we're going to explore the positive aspect of it first. So if we're going to have circles that are going to dive deep into feelings of times that we felt left out, times we felt excluded, times that we felt wrongly done and oppressed for identity pieces of our social identity, let's dive in first to times we felt like we belonged. Let's dive in first to creating a community where we first feel safe to have those conversations. So that's what we're going to go through first. I'm going to take you through the agreements just like I would with a classroom of 5-year-olds or a classroom of 15-year-olds or a classroom of a staff. And I'll have actually the entire room repeat those together just to get them in our minds. Sound good? Y'all ready for this? Okay. So the first agreement is, and I'll say it and you can just repeat after me, is respect the talking piece.
Respect the talking piece.
So you always want to have something, it doesn't matter what it is, that can go around the circle to create focus. Now, a couple of things about the talking piece. This little friend that I have actually came from a trip that I took to Bolivia, and I was in a small town for 2 weeks, did not know a word of the language in the town I was in, and I felt like an infant trying to get my needs taken care of. Till finally I went to an event where there was music, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was seen and felt and heard, and I could contribute to something that was happening. And so it was an experience of being able to transcend a difference. So that's what this talking piece represents to me. And if you do use a talking piece, try to use something that has significance to you, and to your group, and what you're trying to say and do. Now, the talking piece, there's a specific protocol for how we're going to pass it. When I pass this talking piece, I'm gonna have you, just like you're doing right now, make eye contact with me. It seems really simple, but you'll watch even in this circle, we're not gonna be perfect at it because it's not natural to us. We don't spend time looking at each other in the eyes when we pass things, and ooh, that skill is a good thing to share and practice. Because just in that little moment of me handing you this piece, we can just practice it, there's a moment of recognition, right? I see you, I'm here with you, we're together, okay? So that one little piece goes a really long way in practicing that social skill, yeah? So that's the talking piece. It's really simple. When you got it, you talk. That's it. The second agreement is speak from the heart.
Speak from the heart.
You got it. So speaking from the heart means that you're going to do your best to be honest. You're going to do your best to be bold. And you're also going to do your best to be vulnerable. Now, the thing about vulnerability is it's not oversharing. I don't need all your deepest, darkest secrets. But I do want your honesty. I do want your realness and your rawness. And the truth about a circle is this. The first person in the circle who decides to be vulnerable will give everyone else in the circle permission to do the same thing. So I hope that's you. Any questions on that? All right, next one is listen from the heart.
Listen from the heart.
Okay, listening from the heart is twofold. The first one is obvious. It's what you see on the outside. It means that while we're speaking or while someone else in the circle is speaking, we're not going to talk, We're going to be silent in that moment. But the second part is more important, and it's the part that I can't see. It's what's happening in your own mental choreography while people are speaking. Listening from the heart means that while other people are speaking, you're watching the little dance your mind is doing. Is it creating a story about that person? Is it creating a judgment about that person? Or is it just like wandering off to what you're going to have for dinner? Because that's not listening from the heart either. So are you present, and are you listening non-judgmentally to the person that's speaking? So this is an act of love and curiosity that you bring to listening. All right, here's my favorite one. What happens in the circle stays in the circle. What happens in the circle stays in the circle. Nice. This is where we create like our little classroom Vegas. Something that is nice to consider here is this, FERPA, okay? It's nice to tell your students ahead of time that yes, what happens in this circle is our tree of trust. We are agreeing that we will keep our stories here. Now here's the thing, if you share something in the circle that was alive for you and you want to go out in the world and say, I was in a circle today and this is what came out for me, that's your story. You share it however you want to share it. Everyone else's stories, though, are their stories and they stay here, okay? But should you share a story that might harm yourself or someone else, you all know this, then I would have to take that out of the circle. That's the only reason why we would need to take something out of the circle. So that's nice to tell your students that in that state of trust. Ooh, this one's important. Ready? Trust, you'll know what to say.
Trust, you'll know what to say.
This one's really hard for me. But this basically says that when you put this talking stick in your hand, you're going to know exactly what to say. So you don't need to rehearse. You don't need to practice. It's really tough, say, if we go around this side of the circle, Heather's our last friend in the circle, she might be really wanting to think about and craft the perfect answer. So when it comes to her, she's got something fun and witty and eloquent. It's not about that, right? We don't need that. I don't need you to entertain me in the circle. I need you to be honest. So do your best that when this thing comes to you, you'll just trust you'll know what to say. Messy and imperfect and everything else that might go along with that response. Okay? That one's difficult. Oh, this one's difficult for some friends as well. Say just enough.
Say just enough.
So you'll notice the way that I run a circle protocol is I don't ask open-ended questions. And there's a reason for that. I use sentence stems. So instead of saying, when are you most happy? I'll have you complete the sentence, I'm most happy when. The reason I do that is because we all have friends who could go on and on and on about when they're most happy, right? We all know those people. I'm one of those people. And we also have those people who in a circle might not even know where to begin, right? And you've given them the first few words, okay? So the sentence stems are really a great way to keep equity of voice in the circle, which is always what we're looking for in a circle protocol. While we're here, it's important to note passing is always an option. You can always say pass and move on. What I encourage you to notice though is if you have students who are passing a lot, to lean into that. I know particularly if you have English language learners, any SPED students, sometimes it's nice to give them the prompts ahead of time. Say, hey, we're gonna do a circle, and here's what I'm gonna ask you to say, and then have them choose an answer and have them even rehearse it to you. So can you say that for me? So that by the time they get to it, they're ready to go. So lean into why they're passing, and it might mean that they need to be prepped a little bit beforehand, and that's okay too. Any questions on that before we get going into the circle? Okay, so I like to start with something called a mindfulness moment, which is just breathing, okay? One of my mentors, her name's Meena Srinivasan, and she's done a lot of work in equity, and particularly circling, and she says, we cannot solve the inequities of this world through breathing. We can't. But we cannot solve the inequities of this world without breathing a lot through the process, okay? So this just takes this moment to kind of center as a group and to take a relaxing moment. A little bit of a breath, quick tip, is that if you're doing a circle in the morning and your circle is like totally dead, you may want to have your students hold their breath on an inhale. This activates the sympathetic nervous system, which is the nervous system responsible for the fight or flight response. Usually we're like, no, we're avoiding that nervous system. That nervous system is okay. In fact, ideally we want balanced sympathetic and parasympathetic. Balanced activation and relaxation. That's where we're in a good state. So to take a breath in when we're tired actually gives us a little bit of energy when we might need it, yeah? To hold our breath on an exhale is going to be what decreases our energy, which is what we may need, about high noon when things are a little bit wild somewhere, okay? Yeah. So what are we feeling? Do we need to amp our energy up or down? Okay. All right. So I'm gonna have you uncross your legs. That's super helpful. Now here's the thing about breath is this. When you take a breath in, you want to feel your belly expand, okay? That's the only way that you're getting a breath that's actually doing you any good, so just kind of keep that in mind. So we're going to lift our arms up, take a deep breath in, grab some air, hold it, exhale, let it go. Let's try that again, deep breath in, grab it, hold it, you can tense your hands, exhale, let it go. All right, nice, good job guys. All right, so the opening of every single circle is exactly the same, whether you've done this with students one time or a zillion times, because it's going to be a little bit different each time. So what you're going to do is you're going to say your name, and you're going to say, I bring. I bring. And what I mean by I bring is, I don't care if you brought your cell phone or your coffee. I want to know what you brought to this room today, to this circle. So this is kind of a value. Maybe you're bringing honesty or humor or curiosity or excitement. I also notice that people sometimes get frustrated when they're like, oh, that person took my word. None of that. That person shares that word with you. You now have a connection. So if someone says the word that you thought you were going to say, beautiful, great. Now you've got someone who's really connected to you in this moment, okay? So don't worry about any repeats. Say your name, and I bring. Eye contact as you pass the talking piece. That's the big challenge, okay? So my name is Sarah, and I bring an open mind. So you'll say your piece and then you'll pass it.
So my name is Valerie, and I bring acceptance.
Thank you. My name is Danny, and I bring awesomeness. My name is Cynthia, and I bring honesty.
My name is Brooke, and I bring openness.
My name is Luke, and I bring observation.
My name is Miguel, and I bring my listening ears.
My name is Heather, and I bring curiosity.
All right, so from that opening, which is a great way to start with your kiddos, with the little ones, if you do this with, sometimes it's nice to define some values and some things beforehand, right on the board. These are some things that you might end up bringing with you today, right? So okay, we're gonna dive into this belonging circle. So the first round is, I feel I belong when. I feel I belong when. Now, I often define belonging as a time or a place or an activity that you get to feel you bring your whole self into, right? You don't have to leave any aspect of yourself at the door. We spend a lot of time having to do that in certain situations. So what are some places where you feel like you get to bring your whole self to? This might be your home, your church, a community that you're a part of, an activity. A lot of times kids who are involved in fine arts and sports will tell me that those are the places that they feel they really belong. I feel I belong when I'm on the dance floor. Something I'd like you to know about me is, So in just a matter of 5 minutes, I feel like my comfort level has shifted quite a bit in this group of people. And because of that, I'm going to move a little bit faster. I'm actually going to move us into the social identity circle, if you guys are okay with turning up the heat a little bit. So that was just kind of the beginning taste of just kind of the get to know you circle, right? Because we want to talk about, like I told you at the beginning, I wanted to be a mermaid when I grew up. Good social protocol is we're at the surface level for the first part of our circle, right? Very surface level. We go deep, and then we don't end deep. We come back to the surface, right? Okay? So we always want to start at the surface. Go deep, and then move on. So I want you to look at this social identity circle. So this is a circle of different social identities. And when I work with students, a lot of times I have them fill this out so that they're reflecting on these pieces of their social identity. So just kind of reflect and look at this, and I'll be putting back on here, and just kind of think about what each of these pieces are defined as for you. This is kind of the circle that makes up who you are. And you'll notice that a lot of these, most of these, 90% of these, you didn't get to choose, did you? No, you didn't get to choose them. Kind of just how you came in. Yeah. So let's take one more of those big deep breaths. And I'm going to have you share with me, and I'll put this back up here so you can look back at it if you need to. But you'll share a piece of my social identity I'm most proud of. So you can look at a piece of my social identity I'm most proud of. And for this, like, don't need the story around it. Just kind of, tell us what it is. And you'll notice from our beginning circle, which is great, is this a space for discussion? No. It's not. It's a space where you get to state what's real for you and I get to witness you in it, right? That's the responsibility of the circle, is to witness. So, responses like, those are good. Those like heart sounds. But the safety of the circle is that no matter what you say in this circle, the facilitator, me, and then the circle itself is going to witness you in that, right? There's not response, or this is how you fix it, or any advice, or any BS like that. Okay? So, the piece of my social identity I'm most proud of is my gender.
The piece of my social identity is that my religion is about love.
The piece of my identity is I love God.
Pass.
A piece of my social identity I'm most proud of is my religion.
A piece of my social identity I'm most proud of is my age.
Why don't you stole my answer? The piece of my social identity I'm most proud of is my spirituality.
The piece of my social identity I'm the most proud of is my role as a mother.
You'll notice that a lot of what we chose were things we were proud of, things that we chose. Yeah, interesting. Next one's a little bit more difficult. You may pass. I'll tell you that adults have a more difficult time with this answer than the teenagers I sit in circles with. It's just the truth. You should know that our teens are brave. You should be hopeful about that. A negative assumption someone's made about me based on my social identity is the magic and the difficulty of this circle, particularly with students, is when it comes to a question like this, some of us have multiple ways to answer it, and some of us don't. Which brings up this concept of privilege, right? That many of our students have many aspects of their social identity that people make negative assumptions about. And many of them can't think of a single thing about their social identity that people would have a reason to make a negative assumption about. In a circle experience, we don't necessarily stop to talk about that because a lot is done in the witnessing of what happens in that circle experience, right? So when we talk about privilege, we talk about places in the social identity that the culture thinks is positive. And a lot of times we'll have them go through this circle piece and rate what they believe their social identity, what society would rate them as, high or low. So they'll write high or low around the circle. So for example, I would write low in my gender box. Even though I told you that's the thing I'm most proud of, society, as you both reflected, would rate that as low. So what you end up having is some of us in this circle are going to have highs all around that thing. Some of us are going to have a lot of lows. Most of us are interspersed in some way, okay? But what's interesting is even for those of us who have multiple lows, meaning multiple aspects of our social identity that the culture, that the society has negative assumptions about, we all have a place, typically, where we can find a place that we actually have a little bit of privilege, that each of us has that, whether it's our first language and national origin, that's for a lot of us, our sexual orientation. I have a lot of students who tell me, I can wear a cross to school, I have my cross necklace, I can wear that, and no one thinks anything about it. But I have a friend whose spiritual or religious affiliation, she can't wear the things that represent her religious or spiritual affiliation without facing some kind of negative assumption. Does this make sense? So we all have a place on this circle where we might experience privilege. So in my life, I experienced privilege based on my first language. So to end a circle like this, we always go through, and I'm going to go back to my green circle, a reflection round. So just very quickly, right now I'm feeling, and instead of actually doing the sentence then, I'll just have you say the one word, okay? So just one word to capture how you're feeling, okay? And it can be the truth. So I want you to be like inspired and curious and all these things, but you might feel anxious and you might feel uncomfortable, and that's okay. And a lot of times, if I have a circle of students who half of them say they're uncomfortable, I know I did my job. Yeah. I feel hopeful. All right, thank you, friends. Give this group a great hand. So that was kind of a blend of a green circle we did in the beginning. With time, I kind of wanted to speed it up and go into the social identity circle, okay? So typically the way that I would do this with a structured class is I would do a full green circle, meaning a circle where we're just hanging out on the surface the whole time, okay? And then I would start to go into a circle like the social identity circle. With these circles, I gradually turn up the heat, meaning we go from social identity to really then starting to dig into topics specifically around race, culture, and privilege. Do they get uncomfortable?
Yes, you have to.
And yes, you have to. What I can tell you is that our students are really excited to have these conversations, particularly the secondary students. What's really interesting about it is the feedback that I've gotten, and I'll show you the research that I'm beginning with this to kind of show that you can, in fact, change perception over a series of experiences like this, right? But that our students, what they tell me is this feels like some of the most meaningful time I've ever had at school. This is my favorite time I've ever had at school. And we dive into, as we go through these circle processes, particularly in history classes, our last circle is about social movements. So we actually have them reflect on current social movements. So they'll talk about Black Lives Matter, and they'll talk about Me Too. And we'll talk about past movements, such as movements that occurred during the Civil Rights Movement. We'll talk about movements that were effective, movements that were ineffective. And then we'll have them actually brainstorm how social movements of today could be more effective. What are some of the things you think they identify for how social movements of today could be more effective based on looking at social movements of the past?
Less violence.
Maybe less violence, yeah, definitely, that's fun. Where are most of our social movements occurring now?
Social media.
Social media, right? So one of the things they start to make connections about is like, oh, So one of the ones that worked, like people kind of had to like show up for and kind of to like talk with their mouths and their bodies, and they kind of had to like get off their computers, and you know, maybe we can use our computers to collect ourselves, but at the end of the day, it's going to take me being an upstander, and in the little moments of my life, standing up when I see moments of inequality, right? So this is really where they get to. So this is a survey that we take them through, and I don't need to necessarily read it to you. You can see it, but sorry if you can't read it that well, but my school values diversity, makes people of all races feel welcome. We even go into sexual orientations, feel welcome. Here's where we see a lot of change occur. It's important to talk about racial equality. We always see this go up with students. Their passion and their comfortability goes up. I feel comfortable talking about race. This changes. I feel comfortable when others talk about race. That changes. I feel comfortable speaking up when I see racial inequality. That changes, and that's perhaps the most important thing that we're looking for, yeah? My teachers are equipped to facilitate discussions on diversity. Will of course change as well. So I know that I only have about 8 minutes left. So the intention of these circles, whether or not you're going to stick to the green, which I encourage you to do while you're first facilitating, or you're going to choose to dive a little bit deeper. I really do believe in this practice. Social emotional learning is like a really broad umbrella term, as I'm sure many of you have discovered. But restorative practices are kind of that practice that I know works, and that I know is kind of my go-to for creating cultures in school environments that really promote the social emotional health of our students. A green circle protocol, just kind of the quick hits of it, are every student says their name and says the value that they bring. That's kind of a core piece, right? The agreements at the beginning, whether you've done it one time or a zillion times, you create agreements. Now the agreements that I showed you are respect the talking piece, speak from the heart, listen from the heart, what happens in the circle stays in the circle, trust you'll know what to say just enough. Those are classic restorative agreements, but I encourage you to word those how you would word them. Because part of what makes the circle work is your own authenticity of a space holder, right? So your talking piece being something that is personal to you, right? Your agreements coming from how you're choosing to hold that space. But those are really, really good, kind of good protocols to start off an agreement with. So we've got our agreements, we've stated our names, and what we're bringing to that circle, right? Because that's where we start to step in and say, this is who I am and this is what I'm here for, which is what we want our students to start to realize that they bring into every space they come in with. The prompts can go anywhere. Like, my sociology teachers are starting to latch onto this and saying, we can have discussions about dress code, we can have discussions about vaping, we can have discussions about really anything we want in this forum. Sentence stem it, sentence stem it, sentence stem it, sentence stem it. Especially when we're looking at classes who have 25 kids in them, we don't have the time, unfortunately, for these open-ended questions. In small groups, sure, totally go for it. But I do encourage the sentence stem for creating that equity in the circle, because as you noticed, was one of our participants speaking more than the other? No, not at all. And the glory of the agreements is that if someone is starting to go too far, you don't have to say, hey, stop, you're talking too much. You go back to the agreements. Hey, you remember we agreed we'd say just enough, right? You can go back to the agreements. So that kind of makes it easy for you a little bit as well, right? Because then it's not this one way you shutting them down thing. It's this mutual agreement that we made that we call back to, okay? So the sentence stems can go anywhere. That's really up to you. Make sure that you close by getting them kind of out of that space, and a great way to do that is with that reflection round of just right now I feel. Right now I feel. Yeah? Mm-hmm.
So I know you do restorative with building the culture and the climate of the campus. What about like restoring a situation where maybe there's issue between a group of people? How do you go? How different is it when it's an issue, an argument, a fight that you're trying to restore with a relationship with two people or a group versus
a circle? This is a great question. She asked, how is it different when we have a very specific instance where perhaps there's been a fight or there's been some kind of harm that's created, which is how restorative would call it. They often call those red circles. Have you guys heard of these red circles? So this protocol looks a little bit different, and you can dig in and search kind of red circles or restorative chats is what you might look at. The way that is structured is you would have a much smaller group. Within that circle, you might have the two people who were a part of the incident, a counselor, an administrator, and sometimes you even invite parents. And the protocol for that goes through a questioning process that first asks some very get-to-know-you questions, right? So before we get into the protocol of diving in deep, we do a little bit of surface level work. Okay, what is a positive thing that's happened to you this week, right? We have both of the people answer something like this. And then we have them both say, what happened? You know, what happened? Who was affected? They both get to answer, who was affected? Okay, so we're just looking at that, we're kind of like stripping it down a little bit. And then the important questions are, what harm was done? What harm was done? And then there's a double opportunity here for the person who created the harm to offer how they would like to repair it. How they would like to repair the harm. And then the other person who might have received harm to offer how they would like to see it repaired. How they would like to see it repaired. And then there's an opportunity to also to state how you were feeling when it happened, and how you were feeling after it happened, and how you're feeling now. A reflection there. What we're hoping to get to is this idea that punishment doesn't always create learning, and it doesn't always create the repair that we're hoping from the punishment. So as we know with a lot of our kiddos, the issues that we get into are so deeply relational, and when we separate them and send them to ISS, for example, the relationship never gets a chance to repair. And when they get out into the world, most of our deep issues that we all in this room struggle with are learning how to repair relationships once harm has occurred, right? How do we do that? And so I've seen like students get into a fight, and when I was teaching, I was working with restorative, and the traditional form would be to separate them and have them say they're sorry, and then we move from there, right? But with these little ones, I asked, well, what would you like to do to repair the harm? And this little boy was like, well, he loves lizards, and so I'm thinking I'll draw him a picture of a lizard. Would I have ever thought to say that or do that? No. And in that moment, that child bringing that choice of drawing that lizard and bringing it to that kid is where that relationship got to be repaired. And that's that choice is where we really get into something excited. That does not mean the consequences may pay. It's not what that means.
Exactly.
It means that we offer an opportunity to restore a relationship.
So in the context of you said you did it at the secondary school, how did you work that within the day?
Great question. Great question. So do you all have sociology sections in your secondary schools? So actually, we have it 2 semesters. So I'll have a separate group of kids and a separate group of kids each semester. And right now, the sociology curriculum for Texas, dig in, asks them to teach about race, culture, and equity. So this is actually a way for them to teach race, culture, and equity. It fits perfectly into their curriculum for them to do circles like this. It's great. For history, the way I did it is I started it in the spring when they began discussions following basically the Civil War through modernity, right? So civil rights to now. I followed them with these circles. And so they did a circle about once a week. I would go in and it would take about 30 minutes, right, of one of their class periods. And so as they were learning about history, they were also learning about their own social identities, and they were starting to make connections. Because what's interesting to me is we can learn about something like Rosa Parks all day, every day, but what does it look like when my friend in my class, which this happened, tells me that every time he wears his school shirt, people think he's the janitor, and he's done with people thinking that. What's the difference in me receiving that information as a white Caucasian female 17-year-old, right? That's what we're looking for. Empathy. Right? Empathy. So that these kids can put empathy into action. And that's where change gets made.